Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland. Hello and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I know I say this every week, but my shock and surprise at this fact does not dissipate every week. In fact, it grows. We're now on episode 45. Claire, how has a 6-part series grown to 45 parts?
I think the less we talk about it, the less my brother will notice.
I think that ship may have sailed.
Yeah.
Poor David, as we've mentioned before, signed up to do, well, he didn't sign up.
He didn't. He was prevailed upon.
Yeah, but also I think to save your family honour, he felt he had to get involved because the sound was so terrible on our first, we're going to call it an episode, but it wasn't really an episode. And has been doing our sound recording ever since, over all those months, and in fact now years. So that has been up to 45 episodes that David has given his time up every week. As you know, we don't have any budget. We don't make any money from this whatsoever. So David has been doing it basically for gratis, apart from anything that sells on our merch shop. So we really appreciate you buying merchandise because it just goes straight to David. But we've also had a cunning plan. We see young people doing this on the Twitters of this the thing where you can buy somebody a coffee, and we've set that up. So if you feel like buying David a coffee, you know, he's very nice. He's also available to do sound. I don't want to sort of pimp him out, but he is now freelance doing this. So if you do need sound recording done too, have a look for David. But we'll put up links on our socials. So if you feel like buying him a coffee for this fantastic sounding, mostly free podcast, then you can buy him a coffee there.
Yeah, that would be fantastic if you would like to do that.
Now, Claire, I was just thinking, has there been anything in the news that you'd like to talk about?
No.
Okay, good day, madam.
Yeah, we've been in the news, Zoe.
What?
Absolutely. Now, we were the Times podcast of the week, and that was really incredible. And then as a result of that, we were on the Sunday Times seasonal podcast, the podcast to listen to. And it was actually really nice because it had a lot of kind of like spooky podcasts, you know, for Halloween. But then it said, if you want some true life stories of the horror of what happened to women. So they weren't treating it as a joke. It was really, really nice to suggest that people might go and find out more about it by listening to the podcast. So as a result of that, we've got loads of new listeners. So hello, new listeners.
Hello.
I hope you enjoy. We also had a really nice piece written in The Observer. It was a piece written by Sally Howard, and it was about why the witch hunt victims of early modern Britain have come back to haunt us. And it said the women killed as witches centuries ago are starting to receive justice, but let's not glamorise the murder of innocents. And it was a really, really good and thoughtful piece on why we might want justice for those victims. Then what happened, Zoe? This
is quite exciting.
Yeah, then what happened is obviously as a result of some researcher reading their weekend papers, we had a real flurry of UK interest and ended up in the BBC Radio 4 Today show in the morning. Then Jeremy Vine's show contacted us and we're on that. Then BBC 5 Live. So it was brilliant to have the opportunity to speak to so many people and to raise the profile of the petition. And since then, so many new people have got in contact. So many people have joined the podcast and subscribed to the podcast. So that's brilliant. So it means that we're having the opportunity to really let everybody know about the story of the women killed as witches.
I think it really showed a kind of a sea change in attitudes about it as well, because even though you were on all those different things, there was only a tiny, like maybe 2 negative comments, you know, sort of along the lines of why now, what's the point, you're rewriting history, the usual sort of very slight niggles. But the support has been huge, which is just really, really nice to see that it's actually getting out there and people are understanding about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were quite overwhelmed at the fact that there wasn't any more negative comments, that people seem to be taking it seriously, that they're engaging with understanding and recognising the past.
Especially now, Claire, that you are a public figure, you know, that you're now that you're a celebrity, you know, that could have gone much worse. It could have been, you know, really TV star, thinks she's cool, you know, but it wasn't like that, which was nice.
No,
nice.
I thought I was cool long before television, Zoe.
But now everybody else is aware of it.
People probably don't know. I'm not sure what crossover there is between the TV show and this, but Zoe is referring to the fact that I am currently on Channel 4's Murder Island. As you know, I'm a QC and I deal with miscarriage of justice cases, and I am the prosecutor on Murder Island. So
it's given us no end of marvellous opportunities to say to it for everybody. I think it's not just me saying this to Claire, everybody's saying to Claire, where's the evidence? There's your evidence. In a kind of haggerty voice. Show me the proof. Quite exciting.
What we should have done if we'd got ourselves in gear, Zoe, is got set up to do our true crime podcast at the same time, so we could talk about evidence. But we're very busy, ladies.
Too many things going on. Too many things. Absolutely. So under the heading of things going on, what else has been going on, Claire?
Well,
that was so professional.
Well, under the heading of what's going on, I'm going to tell you what's going on, Zoe. This week we're invited by Professor Nicola Ring. We've spoken about her before, and in fact we've already recorded with her, but that's not come out yet. She's going to be in the podcast soon. Professor Nicola Ring contacted me when there was first publicity about the Witches of Scotland and said that she wanted to do research on women who were early healers and midwives and carers who, because of that job that they had, became involved in accusations of witchcraft. So as you know, Zoe, they have completed a fantastic bit of research on this, using as a starting point the survey of Scottish witchcraft, but then going into much more detail by looking out the records and taking what they can from that. So in order to kind of present it, we had an online seminar for students of nursing, midwifery and law about the research done in relation to folk healers and midwives accused of witchcraft for helping others. It was a brilliant talk, and I can't wait for the research to come out so everyone can read it. We also heard from the lecturer Leslie Dodd. He spoke about the witch trials in the context of religion, and his talk was fascinating, and he's agreed to come on the show as well. So that's someone else we have to speak to. So as soon as the work of Professor Ring and her colleagues become available, we will show that through social media so you can have a look at it. Zoe, that's not the only news. What else was in the news this week?
Well, while you were talking to all these national news outlets, I also had a wee gig. During the week, obviously, I'm a teacher. So when Claire's doing all these glamorous things, I am doing the glamorous job of educating the youth. So I wasn't doing any of these nice things during the week, but it was still exciting. But I did get invited along to talk at an event that the Scottish Storytelling Centre have been putting on, which is called the Talking Statues Project. And that was a really nice event, actually, where different storytellers came up and spoke about statues that they would like to see happen about people that they think are significant from the past. And I think some of them are contemporary too. So it ranged from people like Billy Connolly to people that had opened the first gay bookshop in Edinburgh, to women in the past that had been involved in politics in different ways. And we were asked to come on and talk about the Witches of Scotland campaign. So that was nice to share to a different audience as well. And definitely within the context of why do we have statues? What's the point of them? What can they be for and who can they mark? So that was really nice to have that conversation as well.
I know I'm always talking about how we need more statues to women. That's absolutely crucial. But when you said Billy Connolly, I was like, yeah, I would kind of like a statue to Billy Connolly.
Yeah, no, it was quite nice actually, because the lady that spoke about it was, he is a big part of Scottish culture for many people, and it's
Yeah.
probably more representative than politicians, for example. So I think that was quite a lovely idea actually.
Yeah. Zoe, we have one final bit of news. In fact, the news is getting so big it might actually overshadow everything else. Next week we'll have no news. I'm like, do you have any news? No. Right, moving on.
Move on.
So the other news, and it's really quite significant news, is that the miners' strike pardons Scotland bill is being considered by the Parliament. It follows an independent review into the impact of policing on Scottish communities during the miners' strike. The review was led by John Scott QC, and it recommends that the Scottish Government introduce legislation to pardon minors convicted of certain offences. Now, what's important about this is it's once again the Scottish Government using legislation in respect of a pardon, but it goes further than that. The proposed legislation is collective, it's to be given to everyone, and it's also specifically to apply posthumously. So we have their precedent for the idea it's both collective and posthumous, and that's what we're wanting, obviously, for those killed as witches.
I mean, if that's in place, how could anybody argue against asking for the witches to be pardoned?
They can't. There's no jurisprudential reason why, if they can't make a collective and posthumous pardon for the miners, they can't make a collective and posthumous pardon for any other group of people. So it's great to have that recent precedent that we can see. And also it's great to actually look at the legislation to see how they did it, because one of the things about the earlier pardon in relation to same-sex sexual offences as they were at the time was required people to opt in and apply for it. Now, obviously, people who were killed as witches cannot apply for a pardon or cannot apply to be part of the scheme. But the miners' strike was collective. You've got it anyway. You don't need to apply for it. And that is one of the sort of technical issues about how you give pardons to people who haven't applied for it. It's being considered just now. The legislation's in place, and fingers crossed that bill gets passed and is made law for those that were convicted of those offences. The Justice Minister, Keith Brown, said, "A collective pardon will restore dignity to those convicted, provide comfort to their families, and, I hope, will bring closure to the sense of injustice members of the mining community may feel." And that's, of course, he's referring to those that are still with us. What was also discussed was, it was said that there was an intention to provide a collective symbolic pardon, which recognised the disproportionate consequences suffered by many miners because of their participation in the strike. And again, the Scottish Government response to our petition was to accept that the Witchcraft Act was discriminatory and people suffered disproportionate consequences. So again, the same language has been used. The Scottish Government, in its response to our petition, has already accepted, and I quote, "There are clear similarities between the injustices of those convicted in a discriminatory manner for same-sex sexual activity and the injustices of women classed as witches many centuries ago, which could justify legislative steps being taken in this area."
That's really positive. That's a good note to end the news on. Thanks for your news round.
We're shuffling papers now, listeners.
At the desk. I'm just going to drink from my TVAM teacup. I don't have a TVAM teacup.
The Witches of Scotland teacup.
I have actually got my Witches of Scotland teacup.
So have I.
Right.
It makes the tea taste better. Brackets. For legal purposes, it doesn't make the tea taste better.
Makes you feel good while you're drinking your tea, though. So thanks for the news. So we'll move on now to our next section, which is the Women Not Witches. And Claire, in your research this week, you've been looking up references particularly to Halloween.
Yeah, I looked up references to Halloween, and as you might expect, because these people weren't witches and didn't have connections to Halloween, there really weren't that many. But Halloween doesn't appear to be the festival then that it obviously was now. References are made to Halloween on a number of occasions, but most of the festivals that things are based around are like Samhain and the solstice. Those kind of appear to be more important in diaries. But there are some references to Halloween. Sadly, whilst there is some information on the references to Halloween, the detail in relation to the women is very, very scant. So I'll begin with Janet Bowman. We know that she went to trial in 1572, And that's really all we know about her, except the allegations made against her. It was said she used a shirt for diagnosis, like somebody's shirt. She would be able to try and diagnose the person with what illness they had as a result of that. She said that she brought the shirt to an elvish well, and she charged the spirit in the name of the Father, the Son, King Arthur and Queen Elspeth to remove the illness or take the sick man to them. So basically calling upon the spirits to remove the illness by using, in place of the person, their shirt. She said that she couldn't do a cure because it was past Halloween. So presumably in some way, the theory was that after Halloween, cures could not be done. It was said that she predicted the death of an infant because she got a blast of evil wind, and that she learned her curing from a woman in the Potter Row who had once cured her. She started her prayer with Blist Benedicti. After she washed her hands at a holy well in St Leonard's, there came to her a man of our good neighbours. She predicted that the regent would die. She bore 5 bairns while subject to the fairy for 7 years and felt no pain. So those are allegations that were made against her, and in part confession. We see there an Edinburgh woman who it said was trying to cure people and unfortunately became involved in these witchcraft accusations. We don't know whether or not she beat the rap of being accused of a witch or whether or not she was killed. Zoe, is there anyone else?
Yeah, Isobel Sinclair, she had a trial in 1633 in Orkney, and she was accused of using rituals for protecting cattle at Halloween, using linen cloth and the hair of the beast. It says she was with the fairy, much like Janet Bowman, and they gave her second sight to know if any fae body are in the house. And that's all the information that there was for her.
And lastly, another Jonnet Forsyth. We know her trial took place on the 11th of November, 1629. And it was said the allegation against her was that she helped to save a sheep. So what she was trying to do was cure that sheep. In order to save his sheep, the man was advised by Jonnet to sprinkle drops of blood over one of the sheep by a fire on Halloween. So that is what she was said to have done, which got her accused of witchcraft. Sadly, we don't know the outcome of that case. So 3 women that we remember not as witches, but as women: Janet Bowman, Isobel Sinclair, and Jonnet Forsyth.
So our guest today is Ash William Mills, and he's going to be talking about his book, The Black Book of Isobel Gowdie and Other Spells and Charms. So I'll tell you a little bit about Ash. He has a degree in Celtic Studies and Heritage and is currently studying Scottish Ethnology and History at the University of Edinburgh. He's an animist and folk magic practitioner with over 25 years of experience regarding Scottish and Irish folklore, witchcraft and magic. In his spare time, he commissions and sells items associated with Scottish mythology, folk magic and witchcraft, and other strange and magical curios. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book so you have an understanding of it overall. So The Black Book of Isobel Gowdie and Other Spells and Charms, about Britain's most notorious accused witch, Isobel Gowdie. She gave such a wealth of information regarding magical practices during her confessions that it would have been worthy of a black book or Svartkunst book, as found recently by her Scandinavian neighbours. In this book, Ash has compiled together and translated the charms, spells and magical operations of Isobel Gowdie as were relayed in her confessions in such a way that it's applicable and operational to the modern folk magic practitioner, with additional notes to some of the charms tried and tested by the author. The book also includes the spells and charms from other cunning folk in Scotland accused as witches under the Witchcraft Act during the early modern period or recorded by early folklorists from the 18th century to the present day. Hi, I am absolutely delighted to be welcoming to the podcast today somebody who has recently published a book and I think is going to be of great interest to our listeners, and that is Ash William Mills, who's going to talk to us today about his book, The Black Book of Isobel Gowdie and Other Scottish Spells and Charms. Hi Ash, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm being quite excited to be on the show.
Great, we're delighted to meet you. Could you tell us, first of all, a wee bit about yourself and your background and what it was that led you to write this book?
Right, okay then. It's quite a broad question, but yeah. I'll try my best.
Don't feel you have to give away anything too personal. You can be as vague as you like.
No, that's fine. I suppose I've got to start as sort of the professional side, is that I'm a student at the University of Edinburgh. I previously, before I went to Edinburgh, did an NC course in Celtic Studies. And I'm currently doing a course which is Scottish History and Ethnology. So it's Scottish history from the period of like medieval to like present day, and then ethnology in the study of belief systems, like so what comes into sort of folklore, but more into what people believe, and then it goes into quite a scientific thing of how people believe these folk tales and whatnot. Me, on a personal basis, I am what you class as an animist. I am a folk magic practitioner. As you see in my book, I try to blend in both the academic side into the practical side. So it appeals to both the historian and practitioner. And yeah, so folklore and folk beliefs is something that I've been interested in over like 25 years now. I believe I was 12, 13 when I started getting into mythology and witches and folk beliefs. It's always been an interest of mine since a young age, that sort of root of history. So
there's an interesting sort of origin story of how it was that you came to be writing specifically about Isobel Gowdie that you mention in the introduction to your book.
Yeah, so the book itself has been a process of like 2 years. I have other books in the process as well, but like I go back and forth when I have ideas. And this was coming to completion. It was originally just going to be a simple book of spells and charms from like a historical context from Scotland. At the time, like I already had quite a large section on Isobel Gowdie and transcribing all her magical content that she's relayed in her confessions into a chapter. And then I had like a dream. I won't go into big detail because it's quite a personal dream, where she appeared to me and I was like, this has to, like, then the penny dropped and I was like, this has to be dedicated to her. Like, she already has a large section as it is. And I was already interested in ideas of like, you know, the Black Book, you know, because within legend and within factual history, there's always that talk of the Black Book, and the Black Book is like, you know, in legend, it's the book that was given to you by the devil himself and contains all the spells and charms that you need as an operating witch. But also, like, within recent years, like we used to think this was part of legend, but it was only till recent years that these books are starting to appear at people's personal libraries, like in attics, where, you know, now it's not just legend. These handwritten books of magical recipes, a lot of them were just like, you know, simple herbal remedies, but, you know, herbal remedies, half like sort of magical content. So yeah, so that's how it came to be. And then sort of following up to the book, I did like a wee event on Instagram where, because it just so happened when I had the dream that it was coming up to her, the anniversary of her last confession, right, which I found was quite, quite bizarre. Yeah. So I was like, I have to do some kind of like honouring of her, because we don't know when she died. We don't know her birthday. There's very little we know about her personal life. So I was like, well, you know, I'll get together this event online and sort of honour her spirit, the person she is, and to honour all those people that have met the same fate as Isobel Gowdie. That was great. I had a few people, sort of performers, like singing and then playing instruments and poetry. So it was a really good night. And then it just led on from there to sort of, the book sort of transformed itself. It sort of took a life of its own, and from there it's become what it is now today. So
because there's a big appetite for this particular area, isn't there? There's a growing interest, and we've had some guests on in the past that work within that area. So like the poet and witch Alice Tarbuck, she came on and talked about her book about moving through the year and different sort of natural connections that she makes. I'm really fascinated by the structure of your book. So for people that are going to, obviously they'll go and search it out after this and they'll be bought in its thousands, but they'll have a look at how it's structured. So could you maybe break that down a wee bit? Because obviously there's Isobel Gowdie, but there's a lot more to the book as well.
Yeah, so because like I said, when it originally started writing it and it was coming to completion, it was just going to be a simple book of spells and charms. So it starts off with a chapter of obviously talking about content about Isobel Gowdie's life, you know, the history of Black Book, and magical content in general, and then it goes into like, I've constructed quite a large chapter which to make it look like as what you would see from a black book. So I basically deciphered all the magical content from her confessions and structured it into kind of like if you're reading a black book that would have been found in an attic or in someone's personal library, and how it would have looked. I mean, essentially, I think, you know, ideally, I don't think she would have had be literate, like she would be literate. So I don't think she would have had like a black book. But I'm presenting to the reader, like if she had one with the magical repertoire that she had, this is what it would look like. This would be tried and experiments that she's done herself, comments, you know, as what you see in most black books today. You know, they're not just like recipes. There's people that they've been tried and tested. There's comments about it. And then I go into content about like, there's a part where it's called the Spells and Charms of the Accused. I mean, it's really hard when you sift through the whole witch trials within Scotland or even within Europe, you'll see generic stuff. And you think, yes, this is an innocent person. They're probably not a magical practitioner at all. But then on the other occasion, you'll see, you know, content where it's like people are talking about charms. So it's going off the narrative. Mm-hmm. And they're certainly like, well, tell me about this. What's this? Like, well, this charm is used for broken bones, or blah, blah. So these are like basically cunning folk, or what in Scotland, wise men, wise women, that were being convicted under the Witchcraft Acts. Because in Scotland and England, they had very different ways. Like, so in Scotland, there wasn't no like definition as such of what is beneficial magic and what is malefic, like, so harmful magic. Whereas in England, you wouldn't get convicted much as being a cunning man, because you'd probably get a fine or be in a pillory, like very, like, it wouldn't be as extreme as death. Because they had very distinctions of what is beneficial magic and what is harmful magic. It's sad in a way, but also we have more content of cunning folk because of that distinction not being there. So we have a lot of context and information of cunning folk working in Scotland. And then the rest is like, it's spells and charms that are collected by the early folklorists of like, you know, the 20th, 19th and 18th centuries. Because it's the era of like romanticism and the Celtic revivals coming on along the way, like, you know, growing quite fast. So these folklorists are taking upon themselves to go within like rural villages and collecting content of like stories, remedies, incantations, spells, and from people like cunning folk. So the rest of the book is content recording from like the Victorian era.
I really, really enjoyed looking at some of the spells, in particular as a lawyer going into court. There are a few spells or charms about trying to get yourself a successful outcome and going to court and stuff like that. So there are really interesting ones, and maybe we'll come to look at them a wee bit later. What's so interesting about what you say is that the difference between charmers and people that were involved in witchcraft in Scotland seemed to blur, because originally the Witchcraft Act was only supposed to be people who were in cahoots with the devil. But what appeared to happen was, because they were looking for witches everywhere, because we were in the middle of this Reformation, we were looking for a godly state. James V thought the devil was amongst everyone, everyone was looking for the devils. Some people who would have been cunning folk, who would have been charmers, who would have been doing spells, completely separate from devil worshipping or being in cahoots with the devil or having given up their life to the devil and renounced their baptism and all those things, they were brought in, questioned, kept awake for hours, usually not tortured. Sleep deprivation, repeatedly asked about the devil, and then they would start talking about the devil because they were being asked about it. They would be delirious. They would know what their captors wanted in order to stop them torturing them. And it appears that people who were otherwise charmers, and it might have well have been that Isobel Gowdie was one of these people who had her charms but wasn't in cahoots with the devil, then started talking about being in cahoots with the devil and gave us these sorts of confession which were interwoven with parts of her own beliefs about charms and things like that, and the devil together. And then we have these very colourful confessions. I wonder if you could tell us a wee bit on that basis about what Isobel was, what we know about Isobel herself as a woman. Is it very much?
Like I said, as for her personal life, we know very little. We don't know if she had children. She most likely would have. We knew she was married to John Gilbert. We knew that it was from a farming community. We knew that her husband was in the cattle trade, because she talks about a charm about selling commodities and selling beef at the market to get a good price. So I've talked a bit about the definitions of magical specialists on my Instagram. Basically, there's definitions. So you could either be a charmer or a wise person. A charmer is someone that only has like limited abilities within the magical world. So a charmer normally was like, oh, I only charm warts. Well, that person charms snake bites, adder bites, or that person does this. So a charmer is somebody who only has like a small repertoire of gifts or charms within them that's passed down through them. Mostly there'd be people like, oh, they're from the sixth son or the sixth daughter of a seventh daughter of the seventh daughter, or so on and so forth. I believe Isobel Gowdie to be a wise woman. Simple to the fact, you see a lot of healing material, or you would see from a charmer. But what separates her from the most is because you see other content, put aside the devil bit, like we'll put that aside for now and not explain that. You see stuff like to sell commodities. That takes her now from the realms of a charmer. Now it puts her in a position of being a wise woman, because a wise woman would work on quite a wild field of magical repertoire. They put their hands in different bowls, basically. They put hands to many things. So I believe her to be a wise woman. I believe that she wouldn't have referred to herself as being a witch or doing... I'm not to say that she didn't do harmful magic, because sometimes when we talk about cunning folk, a lot of historians like to, sort of shy away from that because they counteract witches' spells. That's what a cunning folk do, or a wise person does. If it's an illness you can't explain, it is witchcraft. So therefore, you're counterating the witch's spell. So yes, of course, I don't think she would have classed herself a witch. I don't think she was doing any kind of devil worshipping. However, we do have, which is not on the same line of witchcraft, but we have evidence of other material where you're using the image of the devil to place in your enemy's hands. So you're still being a good Christian, and you still Christian values. You're not a Satan worshiper or a devil worshiper. However, if someone you find is doing bad against you, then obviously they're the works of the devil. So then you place them in the hands of the devil to be punished. So you see charms somewhere that, like, I give an example from the Black Books of Albion, where, to punish a drifter, it's going, devil, devil, take this drifter. So you're not using God to punish them. You're using the devil to punish them, and you're placing them in the hands of the devil. But it doesn't mean that you're a devil worshiper. You're actually a better Christian, because you're like, that person do wrong things, so I'm putting them into the devil to be punished. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I believe that maybe she would have, on the odd occasion, come across someone who had conflict or enemies, or not enemies, but people that disliked her or she disliked them, that occasionally the odd curse, because a curse can come in the form of a spoken thing, would have come from her mouth. But was she a witch? I doubt it. Was she a devil worshiper? Very much not. No. However, I do believe there's strong evidence to show that with her knowledge of local folklore around her, like the King and Queen of the Fae, the charms that outgrow, the healing charms, it comes into a category of what a typical wise woman of the Highlands would have been. Yeah, that's my acknowledgement. That's how I see what kind of character she is.
And it would make sense, because her confessions, I'm always putting them in inverted commas, which is not helpful in the podcast,
yes.
But her confessions, which were taken from her probably under some kind of stress or duress,
yes.
Were very detailed. And a way that they would have been detailed was, of course, having the stuff that she did know about as a wise woman interlacing with the stories that they were telling her about the devil. Because in asking their questions, they will say, did you meet with the devil? How many times would you meet with the devil? How many times? Who would you meet with the devil? Till eventually, that they want you to say, I met with the devil, I renounced my Christianity, we met on these occasions, we had sex with the devil. She spoke in the most detailed and evocative terms, but it also seems she was a fairly gifted storyteller, or had a good imagination.
Yeah.
Because she was able to describe in greater detail, or people wrote down in greater detail, a lot of things that she described. Her view of having sex with the devil in particular.
Yeah, like he was cold as well water.
But then that's echoed with the other women, which makes me think that maybe it's the same man that wrote down both their confessions, isn't it? Is it not? Is it, or have I misread that? Is it John Innes, maybe?
John Forbes, I think it was.
We should say there was another woman tried with Isobel Gowdie. And that's
yes, Janet.
Sorry, yes. And both the women say that the same description of what sex with the devil was like, and they use the same very particular description, which, I mean, maybe that just was the description for cold liquid in those times in that place, and maybe that's not such a weird coincidence. But the fact they both said the same thing makes me feel that there's some editorializing coming from the person that was writing down the confessions, because we've talked before about the hand on the head, the hand on the foot, and about how the same phrase is often echoed in locations. So, I mean, you can't help but think, right, well, how much of that is the man that was writing down the confessions, adding his own input, so to speak, to it?
I think I remember hearing one of your podcasts, and you're saying about this comes into subject of leading the witness. And it's pretty much here. So it's like before the evidence presented, you're assuming that this is happening and you're questioning the person. And that's essentially what's happening. So you're trying to lead the witness into the narrative that you want.
Absolutely. The question would have gone this way. If you've already got a statement from Isobel Gowdie and you've asked them what temperature was the skin of the devil, and the person would say it was hot, and you're thinking, nah, that doesn't fit. We need the devil's skin to be cold.
Yeah.
Say, really? Okay, right. Are you sure it wasn't cold? And we say, no, I think it was hot. And then they'd come back an hour later and say, what temperature was the skin of the devil? I think it was hot. Oh, okay. Wasn't it cold? Would the devil not be cold to the touch? The person would ask. And then they would ask 2 hours later, what temperature would the devil's skin be? And lo and behold, the answer now is, I think it was cold. Yeah, it was really cold. Yeah. And they would be nodding, And
then that would be recorded, not previously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
also, it's like the way they were phrasing things was written different the way it was written. So you'll be like, did you have sex with the devil? Yes, I did. I had sex with the devil at such and such time. Like, so it'll be like, I explain in an example in the book where how she would be interrogated. So, and how it would be relayed in the confessions. Because when you read the confessions, it pretty much sounds like that. Like it's coming from her mouth, and obviously it is, but it's been interpreted very differently. So they're saying to her, like, did you have sex with the devil? What was the devil like? When did you have sex to the devil? And she's saying yes, she's replying, but then it's written down as if she's speaking it. So I had sex with the devil in such and such time. The devil's skin was like this, blah, blah, blah. So it's interpreted, like the context is interpreted very different to what she's actually saying and being asked. So you see this very typical throughout Europe, this type of extracting confessions, and we say confessions, which another thing you pointed on is, yes, it says she said of her own free will without use to torture. Yes, that's fine, but they're not talking about the interrogation methods that are involved in, like sleep deprivation, hunger, poor conditions, like to the point where I think you just wanted to die. Like you wanted to be released from this. It is form of torture. Whether you're actually physically using torture instruments, that is still torture, and we know that today. Sleep deprivation, poor conditions, it's abuse.
Absolutely.
So I think in many of these cases, you just wanted it over and done with, and you would say yes to anything and go along with any narrative that they want to force upon you. And I think that's what happened in her case as well.
But what we do have from it, and what your book has managed to eke out, is part of the stuff that she was saying may have been things that she would have used as a wise woman, and spells. And as I say, I really enjoyed going through the various different folklore spells, not just from Isobel Gowdie, but from elsewhere. Do you have any spells in particular, or charms in particular, that you like from the book?
I like the ones involving water. So the forspoken waters. So it's when you saying a water, so you've been affected by the evil eye and it's caused illness. So there's a whole ritual about that. with four spoken waters, and once it's sprinkled upon this water, like you are magically relieved of that illness. There's other ones like the grand rite of unbewitching, because there's the whole rite to it of getting nettles and then arranging the nettles into a circle and whatnot. But I suppose my most favourite is Bruntstones, what I talk about in the divination part. And it's the use of like 3 stones that it is a divination rite, but also it has curative powers as well. And it's used in different types. Like, so mostly it's like, what spirit caused you illness? Was it the hill spirit? Was it the water spirit? Was it the, the grave spirit, like the kirk spirit? And it determines, it's the hill spirit, so that you return to your local hill and you'd be washed with the water from the stones, and therefore like the enchantment put upon you by that spirit is returned back to them. And also it's used as like other things. So like, where is the illness at? So you'd have stones like the heart, the belly, the brain, and then so whatever hissed in the water from heating up these stones, put them in the body of water, would denote what illness came from. And so if it was like the heart stone, that's where the illness lies, because there's bubbling going on, there's noise going from that stone. So that's always been curious, and that appears in quite a few times within both confessions and folkloric material of the 19th century. So that is one of my favorites. But and in general, like, I love them all. Like,
I'm so glad that you brought up the stones, because I read the stones as well and was smiling when I read it, because recently I went to a spa and they did hot stone treatments on the body. Mm-hmm. And they said, where in your body are you sore? Oh yeah, where do you keep your stress? At the top of your shoulders, etc. And then they went about putting the hot stones on where was sore on you. And I thought, okay, well, it's a massage. It is a different thing. Of course, they're massaging you with the hot stones. I thought, but there were similarities, that even in the 21st century, you can go somewhere and people will be trying to cure your ailments by the use of hot stones, not using it in the same way. But I thought, how funny that that's come through the centuries.
No, definitely. Like, I think we have a lot of European links, with immigration and like being in contact with different cultures. We're swapping, we're sharing practices, we're sharing beliefs and, religion. That's going amongst like the people that are importing things to the country. The working class is making that fusion, that beautiful fusion of culture that we call Scotland today. Like, people like to say it's a Celtic country, and in parts, yes, but also, the Scandinavian roots there. There's Anglo roots. There's far back as like Welsh, Brittonic roots. So they all contribute to this beautiful cauldron of culture and folk material. So like, when you're talking about the hot stones, now we know that heat applied to certain muscle releases tension. Back then, where they first, in the early modern period, where people were using hot stones within parts of like Eastern culture, that's seen as magic. That is because only until the Age of Enlightenment, we lived in a magical world. So if you had an illness you could not put down to, then it's something to do with spirits, it's something to do with fairies, it's something to do with witches. So then you now have to determine within the magical realms who has placed this illness on you. And we live, and also things that we do today that we take for granted, like throwing salt over our shoulder, blowing out birthday candles. These are remnants of our ancestors before the Age of Enlightenment, where we did live in a magical world. There was spirits about, there was witches out to get you and cause chaos and destruction. So you needed wards, you need protection, you need a lot of these magical repertoire to keep your family safe, especially if you're a working class person, because crops could fail easily, and that's you done for the whole year. That could be enough to kill your family, because it's your source of income, it's your source of food. Like, now, like, we live in a very different world, and we should be very blessed and thankful, because back then, you did live on the edge. The scales could tip each way, if you weren't careful. And that's why we did mostly resort to magic and cunning folk, because of these reasons.
Well, Ash, it's been really fascinating speaking to you. And I know you mentioned at the beginning there that you're always working on several books. So we look forward to your next book. No pressure, because you've only just released this one.
I know. I'm going to see how this goes for now.
It's so fascinating. And I would say to anybody that hasn't looked at any of the links yet, we'll put the links up. The book is totally fascinating for an insight into Isobel Gowdie, for an insight into the world of magic, for where people's philosophies were at that time to get a greater understanding of why things happened and why they played out the way they did. And also with some guidance that people would certainly find helpful today. And we know that this is a growing area of interest. We've certainly had lots of listeners who are like yourself, are practitioners. So I think this book's got something in it for everybody. It's absolutely fantastic and would really recommend people to buy it and to read it. It's ace.
Yeah,
thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for your time, Ash.
No, and thank you for your time. And thanks for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed it. Any chance to speak about the subject, and I'm right there.
Well, thanks so much. And like we said, we'll put the links up so people can go and find your work and interact with you in your different places too, because you're active on Facebook, I think, as well as Instagram, aren't you?
Yes.
So people can have a chat with you there and probably ask you millions of questions.
No, I'm always willing to answer people's questions. I enjoy it.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yes,
Take
thank
care.
you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us again this week. And as Sally Howard wrote in her article that was out last weekend, if you're heading out trick-or-treating this week with your bism and pointy hat, spare a thought for Lilias and the tens of thousands of unnamed like her. And if you cast a spell, make this your demand of the spirits, that one day Lilias and society's conscience will be laid to rest. I think that's quite a nice note for us to end on, Claire.
That is quite a nice note for us to end on, Zoe, which is why we won't end on that note and always remind people about our socials.
Well, when I say end, what I mean is like that part. Thanks so much for joining us. Please do the usual thing with the podcast, which is follow us on our different social medias. I'd like to say this every week just to make sure that people understand our best place to catch us for a chat, if you want to kind of get into a bit of dialogue, is Twitter. Our Facebook page is just a page kind of for info. It's not a group for chatting on, but our Twitter definitely is. We've also got a YouTube channel. We've got Instagram that Claire, you're active on that one. I don't use Instagram.
Yeah, and it's really, really busy, actually. We've got a few thousand people that are interested in it. That's
great. I just know that if I had Instagram, that I would lose any hours left remaining to me in the day, because between Facebook and Twitter, good Lord, it's a black hole of attention, I would say. But please do catch up with us in anywhere. And if you know people that you think might be interested, don't just assume that they know about the podcast or that they know about the campaign. Please tell them. Evangelize. No, don't. But please do tell people about the podcast so that we get the word out. Because again, the more people we have supporting us and the more people that are upfront about supporting us, that I think the higher chance we have of getting what we want for the campaign, which at the end of the day is what we're doing here.
Yeah, it's really, really important now we make a real push to persuade politicians. So if you know of any politicians, if you're chatting with any politicians, if you're party to any groups, like as a councillor or something like that, it's really important now to make your views on this known so that people are talking about it more generally. So if and when it comes up, people will think, yeah, I know about that. I know what it's about. I know what these people are trying to do. So please do join us and do that. And buy David a coffee.
Yes, please do. And we'll put the links up, because, I mean, jokes aside, David is doing a marvellous job and is now trapped because Claire's his big sister. So he has to keep doing it. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.